Hello and welcome to the Future of Work Pioneers podcast webinar, Navigating the Return to Work and Building a Future That Works, hosted by Experfy. My name is Brad Palmer and I'm a member of the leadership team at Experfy. It is my pleasure to be your host and moderator today. I'll give people a couple of minutes to finish logging in. We are having many participants and attendees join at this time. I see a wide representation of industries, roles, and locations. I think we have people from 4 continents that I can tell right now online with us this morning. So welcome. So as I mentioned, today's webinar sponsor is Experfy, and thank you, Ryan. Incubated at Harvard Innovation Lab and in partnership with Deloitte, Experfy is an AI-powered future of work platform. We specialize in pipelining, expert vetting, and deploying the world's best specialized talents in areas such as AI, engineering, and other emerging technologies. Experfy's AI-powered platform then matches world-class experts from skills-based talent clouds to the jobs or projects within clients' organizations. Experfy can help with external selection, intermobility, upskilling, reskilling, and even build custom clouds for our clients. Build talent clouds of vetted experts, identify skills gaps within your organization, utilize AI-powered matching algorithms, access training and development on demand, and all with a focus on reduced time to hire, outstanding service, and improved organizational performance for our clients. Experfy, the future of work platform for the skills of the future today. So as I mentioned, this is a Future of Work Pioneers podcast. It's our webinar. And the podcast itself was created to interview leaders who are playing a pivotal role in forging a new future. This is a podcast that is making an important contribution to help us understand the future of work and ways in which its pursuit is shaping online education, technology, corporate cultures, and labor markets. Our Future of Work Pioneers ambassadors across the globe enable our mission-critical future of work discussions to reach a wider audience, build an elite closed-knit community, and our thought leaders on the topic of the future of work. At the end of today's webinar, we will show how you or someone else on your team can apply to join the Ambassadors Program. The focus of today's discussion is navigating the return to work and building a future that works. With 2020 creating unprecedented disruption and making massive changes in how we work, we've decided to hold a discussion with consulting, business, government, and education leaders on how we can navigate the new normal and transform to a future that works. Please provide questions in the Q&A, and we will hold them and answer some of them at the end of today's discussion. Today, I am joined by 4 of our Future of Work Pioneer ambassadors, including Ann Gemmel, founder of the Future Works Alliance of Philadelphia, Dr. Erica Barriero, Future of Work strategist at Central New Mexico Community College, Raj Parikh, head of workforce strategy at Wayfair, and Ryan Sullivan, Workforce of the Future offering leader at CFGI, a Carlyle Group portfolio company. Now I'll hand it off to Ryan to talk a little bit about how he got involved in this topic, as well as the return to work concept and broader future that works frameworks. Ryan, please take it away.
Thanks, Brad. My name is Ryan Sullivan. I am part of a company called CFGI. It's a consulting company within the Carlyle Portfolio Group. I've been responsible for the build of our Workforce of the Future offering within our broader business and digital transformation practice. And I got involved in the Future of Works Pioneers Ambassador Program in September, and it's been just a great experience to be able to hear from different perspectives from education leaders, industry leaders, HR leaders, business leaders, technologists, folks from basically all over the spectrum handling this future of work concept. My role here today is sort of just to introduce the return to work framework and the 5 questions that we'll ask in terms of building a future that works for everyone. I'm joined here by leaders in the business, education, and systems sectors, and together, hopefully, we'll be able to tackle this topic from a number of different perspectives. So I'll sort of just introduce the concept. I don't think anything that I'm saying is sort of rocket science, and I'm sure given the participants on this call, a lot of you are tackling this in a number of different ways, and I'm eager to sort of hear from you guys and hear your perspectives. Please be active in the chat. Please ask questions as we go through. For the sake of time, we're gonna try to speed this along and answer questions towards the end. But if anything pops up that's super interesting, please do be active in the chat. So in terms of the concept itself, again, I think we've all been sort of living a new world, since March. Our world got sort of turned upside down with COVID-19. You sort of see the statistics that matter on here. You've got 63 million COVID cases as of today, and rates significantly increasing as we approach the winter. Obviously, that's becoming more complex as we start to hear more about potential vaccines getting approval and distributed. But it is clear that this disruption is having enormous impacts on businesses everywhere, and is not just hitting businesses, but is hitting governments, education systems, policies. It's affecting everything about our life, and I do feel like the future of work is the topic driving fundamental change across almost everywhere in our lives today. You sort of see 50% is the rate at which unemployment has increased in advanced economies from October 2019 to October 2020. Hopefully some of those jobs come back, but we do recognize that some of them are gone, for good. And there will be fundamental changes about, how we need to work in the future. And then I sort of pulled this from the PwC remote work survey, but as of June 2020, 98% of office workers, that's not including our critical workforce segments, but as it relates to office workers, those folks are working remotely today. And that'll have impacts going forward. So as we start to lay out this framework, keep in mind that different companies are at different stages of this, and we've all sort of tackled this concept before. As we think about March 2020, that was sort of like our normal disrupted, where everyone had to get out of the office as quickly as possible, manage what they could, handle business critical tasks. The world we're in now is sort of the new normal, and timelines on here are definitely subject to change, but it's basically thinking through how do we make a remote work environment as productive as possible, and what are the broader impacts of that. As we transition and vaccines do start to get approved and COVID isn't necessarily gone, but it is sort of changing, we'll move into our next normal. And this will be different for every company out there, but ultimately you're transitioning to sort of this hybrid environment where some folks are virtual, some folks are in person. Who knows what degree of remote will be in 6 months from now, but it's definitely an evolving conversation. And then the last phase is sort of normal transformed. COVID has brought a lot of negative consequences with it, but it has given us an opportunity to reevaluate how we do things and infuse sort of some of the things that all of you have been talking about in your day-to-day jobs for a long time. Has brought it to the forefront and presented us an opportunity to reconsider how we do work and start to think about building a future that works for everyone. So as we go through this, our panelists are going to provide a perspective on these 5 key questions. But I wanted to sort of just frame things up to start. I think, when we talk about building a future that works for everyone, you always start with the question, what is the work? And how is that going to change in the future? How do businesses, governments, education systems work to start to shift work itself to create value. Thinking about the workforce concept, what does our future workforce look like in terms of skills and roles? What role does technology play? How do we start to reconsider diversity and inclusion? The big one, and obviously these are all big, but the one sort of driving the disruption here is where is the work done? Where does that take place physically? In terms of remote, in person, or some hybrid environment, but also the broader workplace that surrounds the physical location. Things like culture, things like workplace, things like location. How do we think about supporting our office environment and our work environment at large, and the workers that are in it? How is the work done? Sort of thinking about ways of working. How do we work differently in the future? What do tools look like? What technologies are we using? How are workflows different? And then the last one on here, that's sort of an open-ended question, and I think I'm really interested to hear from our panelists on this. Thinking about a future that works for everyone. How do we refocus work itself to not only meet the immediate needs of 1 to 2 years from now, but start to think about how work itself can transform to benefit society at large? So pulling that all together, and I promise I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to our panelists in a second. Thinking through those 5 questions as we progress through the 4 phases, I think is critical. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Raj Parikh, who's the workforce strategy lead at Wayfair, to sort of provide the industry perspective.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks, Brad, for bringing this group together. It's been a lot of fun working with folks across a lot of different competencies in different parts of corporate America, education, the government sector, and just kind of sharing thoughts about what the future of work looks like. It's so diverse, but there's also a ton of connectivity. So it's been a ton of fun working with Ryan, Erica, and Ann, and they're a great group for all of us to be able to pick our brains and just chat about a very, very meaty topic that's relevant for everyone on this call. So feel free to use the Q&A and chat function to ask us any questions. I know we have some time budgeted at the end. Like Brad was saying, I'm the head of workforce strategy at Wayfair. I specialize in our tech and engineering organization, so supporting about 3,100 folks across junior engineers all the way up to senior leaders for all things that are talent and workforce related. That includes organizational design, what the future of work looks like, both from where the work is being done, how it's being done, and the skills needed to. So this topic is very much near and dear to my heart. It also pays the bills, which is not too shabby as well. I'll go through the statistics on the page pretty quickly, but excited to use Ryan's 5 question framework to talk about some of the key topics from at least a corporate America industry perspective about what the future of work means for me. And would love any questions and follow-ups from the group to clarify or to share thoughts about what it means from a corporate America perspective. So the 3 statistics you see on the screen are actually very diverse, but very much connected when we look at the next slide. First, the majority of folks are feeling burnout. This has been a huge accelerant because of COVID-19. Folks do not know when to close their laptops, when to turn it off, and what productivity means now that you're not enclosed or not being able to communicate as much as well. This is a huge problem across any organization. Wayfair is close to 18,000 employees, and with 75% or more of them feeling burnout, that's a pretty staggering number. The next being the desire for remote work has never been higher. What's really interesting is Wayfair has always really prided itself on in-person work. I think we had a question in the Q&A already from Drew about productivity between in-person and remote. This is something that we're really talking about because the desire is there, but like, how do we implement a hybrid model? How do we think about in-person versus remote work, especially because the desire and the appetite is just continuously growing. And the last piece is, I think, the most relevant for a lot of us on the call is 87% of executives when polled think that there's an experience in the skill gap across their workforce. And this has again been accelerated with COVID, where the gaps in your skills and the gaps in the experiences of your employees are really, really highlighted because we're just in a completely new way of working that we've never tested before. So I'll be covering all these different statistics and topics into the next slide. So just like Ryan had framed up, the future of work, we can think about in 5 different questions. This is by no means exhaustive of all the different things that we're experiencing from a panel perspective or from the folks in the call, but these are some of the things that are most relevant and top of mind for me within the Wayfair perspective and what I'm seeing across the industry in corporate America. So the big what's awesome about the what question is I don't think it's actually changed. We're all in it to create high performing business models or high performing organizations, whether that means the P&L and profitability, whether that means growth or providing top notch service. That hasn't changed, but I think what in the work has changed the most is the closing the skill gap that I mentioned in the previous slide that was accelerated by the pandemic. What this means is, at least from a future of work perspective, we are just seeing that the gaps within our skills across our organizations have never been more pronounced. A good example, at least from a Wayfair perspective, is that we are a company that really prided ourselves on like the 15-minute drive-by or the conversations that led to innovation. We are a company that has grown from 1,000 employees to 18,000 in less than 5 years. So we really value things like communication and critical thinking on the spot and on the fly and in person. And now that we haven't really reinforced the idea of communication virtually, that's a real scale gap that we need to address of how do we communicate at the same rate with that same level of inclusivity, even though we're behind screens and not in conference rooms. So identifying those scale gaps and which ones have been really impacted by COVID and the work from home environment is imperative to how we create high performing business models. When we go to the next question, the who, I think this is actually very much like close to everyone on this call, creating a diverse, inclusive, and geographically agnostic workforce to align with these new skill sets is top of mind for all of us. And DEI and geography are meaning a lot of different things to a lot of different folks, but I think we can all have common ground that creating diversity in the backgrounds that we recruit against, creating a learning and development environment that's inclusive, especially a learning and development environment that acknowledges, hey, we're all going to be in different locations, different time zones, and come from different backgrounds. How can we build those new skill sets to apply to that very diverse future workforce? I don't believe that any high-performing business model or high-performing industry or corporate entity can be successful without having a DEI strategy and being able to say that like we bring the most diverse and unique backgrounds to the table for us to be successful. The where question, which is the third one on the screen, is actually probably the most intuitive. Right now, we're all working from home. So I think productivity and how we operate is actually very uniform. But once we get to that new normal that Ryan described, we're going to be entering a hybrid model. Like I had mentioned, Wayfair actually prided itself, I think 90 to 95% of our employees were in the office or in our facilitation or distribution centers. So we are so used to talking in person, seeing each other, being able to shake hands and have those like 15-minute conversations or in-person meetings. But we're preparing ourselves for a hybrid model that we've never experienced because the appetite for virtual is so high. What we need to think about the most is how do we keep our productivity up while combating things like burnout and virtual versus in-person conflicting ideologies that are going to be impacting a lot of folks. From a how perspective, the thing that we are focusing on, at least from an industry and corporate perspective, is leveraging our people and new technologies to continue to facilitate an environment that creates leverage and innovates faster. Those are two very, very broad topics. I can describe what that means for us at Wayfair. Creating leverage is creating time for folks to be good and to do their job. Work from home has identified that a 10-minute conversation is now a 30-minute Zoom call, and that you may only have an hour and a half every day of actual desk time. So is that the amount of time we want to give folks, especially our best folks? Probably not. So how do we use people and technology to create more leverage and more capacity for folks just to do their job and do it really well? And then how can we use that extra leverage to create innovations faster? Like we've said, we've operated in an environment where innovations were tied to in-person or virtual or a certain demographic or for a certain geography. How do we continue to innovate when we know the future looks completely different? And then the last question of why change, based on conversations with our senior leaders, with the other ambassadors, we've, I think, universally identified that post-COVID winners are the folks that can continue to add the most value and find how all their employees can continue to be the most effective versions of themselves. I think there's a level of disruption, but also a level of resilience that we've had over the past 6 months. but the post-COVID winners are going to take all these learnings and continue to maximize them from a business and societal impact. Again, from a Wayfair perspective, I think the most value add work for all employees is tying back to things like prioritization and creating capacity. So are you working on the highest ROI projects? And are you able to effectively say no to the things that are not the top 3 things on your list? So I know I've thrown a ton at this group, so I appreciate the time. Again, if you have any questions or follow-ups, feel free to reach out to any of the ambassadors, but excited to throw it over to Erica for the education perspective on the future of work.
Hey, Raj, it's Brad. Thank you. Erica, let's take just a second here and ask our first poll question. And to the audience, got a couple of good questions in. Please keep them coming. So the first poll question, can you all see this?
Yes.
So this is on preparedness. So how prepared is your organization for the return to work? This includes return to on-site work locations, new ways of working, new roles, etc. So it looks like somewhat prepared is jumping out to the early lead. Let's give it a second here. Maybe 10 more seconds to get everybody's answer in there. Got a couple of people whose companies are very prepared. That is great to see. Okay, we're going to go ahead and end this. So more than half of the companies are showing as somewhat prepared, neutral, somewhat unprepared, or very and only 2 are very prepared. So very good here. See the results right there. Okay, Erica, with that, let's go ahead and jump into your perspective from an education leader.
Great. Thank you so much, Brad, and welcome to all of our participants. So I actually started my career as a high school social studies teacher. And if you're wondering how I ended up in my current role as a future of work strategist, I would say that it goes back to when I was teaching my students that learning the lessons of the past, we could actually use that to shape the future. I learned recently, actually, that only a small percentage of us regularly think about what the future might look like beyond the next year or 2. But I've always thought about it a lot. And so when I was the dean for a liberal arts school at our community college, I was paying attention to the signals that indicated that a major disruption to higher education was just on the horizon. And the education statistics that matter for me are not a result of COVID. COVID has only accelerated that disruption that was coming our way. So some of these statistics is that there's a predicted 70% of jobs by 2027 that is going to require some education beyond high school. And yet only 26% of students who enroll in community colleges earn an associate's degree or bachelor's degree within 6 years. And this is alarming for me personally when we talk about the pivotal role that community colleges play in providing a pathway for upward economic ability to low-income students and students of color as we think about our pipeline for recruiting a diverse workforce. And then as I was looking at trends of accelerated change, automation, technology, innovation, and you've heard already from Raj that this idea that people are going to need an educational system that can constantly upskill and reskill employees and workers in our economy. And our systems weren't necessarily, our educational systems weren't designed for working learners. They were largely designed for the student that graduates from high school and goes to college full time. So those were some of the things that I had been thinking about it, and then 2019, I had the opportunity to shift to a role in which I was engaging faculty and other leaders at our college to think about the transformations that we needed to make to better serve these students as well as our employees for the future of work. And next slide, please. So I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek, and Simon talks about you should always start with the why. So I'm actually going to start at the bottom of the questions. And the why for me of the work that the education sector needs to engage in is this. Almost every quality of life indicator, from economic security to personal health to community safety, correlates with our levels of education. And yet we still have not designed an educational system that eliminates equity gaps. And if we look at our economic recovery, our community's health and sustainability for the future being intrinsically linked to education outcomes, then it is imperative that we do this work. Now, education institutions have historically been slow to change, but in a period of 2 to 3 weeks in March 2020, colleges and K-12 schools across the nation made an unprecedented change with this massive shift from primarily delivering our learning and support services in person to delivering all of these remotely and online. So one positive impact that I see of COVID-19 is that we know our staff and our faculty and even our often antiquated systems can be agile. And as we think about the future of work and what's critical, one of the things that I think COVID allowed us to experience and build our muscle around is how we're going to be agile, because we will continually face, I think, some pretty significant changes that we're going to need to be flexing to respond to. As we look at the what of the work that we have to do moving forward in education, we know that we have to eliminate the gaps, and we've heard already the skills gap, the digital gaps, and the achievement gaps. And so on the one hand, the grand experiment during COVID to basically provide all students with the option to access courses remotely and other support services certainly provided increased access for some students, particularly for working learners. But on the other hand, it created additional challenges and barriers for others of our other student populations. There's been studies for a while that have looked at student performance in online classes, and students that academically struggle even more in online courses. Other research has also found that up to 20% of our students don't have the technology, including working laptops and high-speed internet, to reliably access services remotely and online. Additionally, part of the what of our work is, we're going to be facing these massive job displacements where we expect that more and more individuals are going to be seeking short-term or on-demand learning experiences that are explicitly aligned with their ability to get a job. But even prior to the pandemic, there were projections that individuals graduating from college today would work an average of 17 different jobs across 5 different industry sectors. And what this indicates is that we need educational systems that will support frequent short-term job reskilling and upskilling over a lifetime. When we think about education and who will do this work, I think we're going to see several new roles emerging in higher education that support teaching and learning, as well as our ability to leverage new technologies, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. I could spend a whole hour talking just about this topic, but since I only have 10 minutes, I'm not going to go into the details of what I listed, except to say that I do also think we're going to see some interesting new partnerships with industry and with educational consortiums that are going to emerge to provide solutions to some of the complex problems that we face. And I guess I would say that if the global pandemic has taught us anything, I hope that that one of the lessons that we take away is that we can't solve today's complex problems by only working to do so within a single sector. As I look at the question of where the work will be done in the education sector, I think largely many of us are experiencing or seeing that we will have some kind of hybrid model, that our work will be done remote and in person. And one of the models that colleges are adopting is called HighFlex. And this is a model that using tech-rich classrooms, HighFlex allows for some students to join a class in person while others are joining it remotely. And it also can be recorded for any student who can't attend the class session in either format. And while HighFlex classes, as kind of indicated by their name, have increased the flexible attendance options for everyone, I still think that we need to do more to leverage the technologies that increase the engagement options for everyone. So as I think about a new normal for working and thinking about work models that are HighFlex, I wonder what work is going to look like that doesn't preference one type of participant over another. So in my experience previously, if I attended a remote or an in-person meeting, but I was a remote attendee, I was kind of on the fringes of it. And so we need to think about how are we going to take advantage of the digital tools for interacting and collaborating when half of our participants are joining remotely and half of them are in person. Finally, as I wrap up with how work will be done, I want to focus on the area of creating an agile workforce. A key takeaway for COVID-19 at C&M is that we have an opportunity to leverage cross-training and multifunctional roles that we can use to quickly shift staffing to where the emerging needs are. So for example, when we had to quickly pivot to a primarily remote environment, it left some of our employees with not enough work to do because a portion of their jobs couldn't be done remotely, while we had other employees that had way too much work. So our college developed a system of internal want ads where units could post work and jobs that they needed help with, and employees who needed work could take on these jobs. And what this did was open the door to some of us thinking about how we could start cross-training employees in high demand areas that would allow us to quickly shift staffing resources. So for example, we could train our parking and safety staff to be able to assist with our call center operations when the volume of calls exceeded what our staffing could effectively respond to. And then the parking officer back on duty now is equipped with knowledge from the contact center that she can use in her everyday interactions with students. And as we think about these building these agile systems and cross-training, it also allows us to build a system that creates greater agility and mobility opportunities for our own employees within our organization. And I'll end with this thought. COVID-19 has obliterated the certainty that many of us have had about our futures. And so while this uncertainty creates fear and anxiety, It also means that a whole lot more of us are actually thinking about a future beyond just the next year or two. And for me, I think this is important because we're not passive actors in a future that simply unfolds. We are active participants in building a future that works. So with that, do we have another poll question coming up?
We do. Thank you, Erica. And we're getting from the audience a lot of questions on the chat. They are appreciated. If you would not mind, try to ask the questions in the Q&A section, but we will try to get to as many in both the Q&A and the chat as we can. And with that, we're ready for our second poll question. And this one is on remote work. So after the pandemic, how likely are you to work in an on-site office location for more than 50% of your work week? So if we could get some feedback from the audience on that. A couple of people can't wait to get back in the office. I've got to admit, I do like the flexibility of working from home every day, but I miss the culture and the collegiality and seeing people in the office. So there's a couple of people, 3 people, 4 that can't wait to get back. Not sure yet. Heck no. There's a few people that really like being on the remote. So let me go ahead and end this. Share the results with everybody. Take a look at some of the feedback that we've seen here. So a nice bell curve.
Pretty even.
Yeah, very good. So with that, let's go ahead and go to Anne. Ryan, there we go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ann Gemmel. Thank you, Experfy and colleagues of the Future of Work Ambassador Program for pulling this great hour together. I will keep it, let me time myself. I'm going to keep it to 8 minutes. That is the goal. I wanted to start with some statistics that matter. But before that, just a quick background about myself. I'm the founder of Future Works Alliance in Philadelphia. I recently was personally disrupted because of the pandemic. Philadelphia was facing almost an $800 million budget deficit, which eliminated the unit that I was working on, leading the Future of Work policy and strategic response in the region with quite a few collaborators. And so in June 2020, I decided to transition that work out to outside of government and create a space where stakeholders could come together and plan across sectors and silos for disruptions, and also seize opportunities involved with the future of work. There are definitely going to be opportunities. But just take a minute and look at these statistics. These are the kinds of statistics that political leaders may not want to talk about because they're challenging and it's bad news. Some estimates hold that 42% of the jobs that are lost to COVID may be gone for good. There's 2 forces at play here. One is the decimation of small businesses. We're going to see a consolidation of corporate power because of the pandemic. The folks that had the cash reserves and the technology to quickly pivot during the pandemic are really doing well right now. You need to look nowhere beyond the massive amount of national hiring that Amazon and Walmart are doing, for example. And that's really changing consumer habits, and that's going to change the business landscape. Many of the jobs on main streets and smaller towns are not going to be there at the end of this. And it's not equally spread. The pain is not across the board. In your top tier of income earners, we're only looking at about 9% unemployment rates. And there was an article yesterday questioning the the level of confidence that we can have in unemployment numbers, which is, just another reflection of some of the gaps between real-time data-driven decision-making in the public sector versus real-time data-driven information that the private sector can corral to pivot quickly. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But in the bottom fifth of earners, we're seeing extraordinary levels of unemployment. This is extremely disruptive, naturally, to lots of people's lives, and of course to metro areas where bottom earners, service industry workers are concentrated in metro areas. Lastly, one of the things that I think is related to some of the questions in the chat, and of course to my other panelists, is that 1 in 4 workers just before the pandemic, 25% of our workforce was working in service areas that supported the professional worker, that supported business services. And this was more possible because of offices housing workers on a daily basis. So think about dry cleaners, think about your lunch counters, think about food delivery folks, services that support businesses, caterers, the list goes on. About 25% of our workers were in those industries. And that's extreme. It remains to be seen how disruptive those industries will be. Will they recover as people realize they need those same services when they work from home? We don't know this yet. So these statistics introduce a lot of, reinforcement of what previous panelists have said, but they're also, again, not something that someone who's looking to get reelected necessarily wants to highlight about the realities that we're in. Next slide. So in consistency with the other key questions and looking at, systems view, we have to recognize first and foremost that we've had a significant landscape change since before the pandemic. I mean, nothing like stating the obvious, but when you look at the line of work that I'm in, which is, building collaborations and facilitating improvement across systems for a specific geographic metro area, you have to constantly reassess changing landscape, whether it's economic or in the case of Philadelphia, we've had, like many places across the city, a racial reckoning. The pandemic is being dealt with in different ways in different geography. So the landscape is constantly changing, and it's just a new world than it was 6 months ago, obviously. And it's become clear that what the work ahead, from my point of view, is that we need to build equity infrastructure for authentic collaborations. Workers, students, citizens, they expect two-way engagement because they've been raised with social media. They've been raised with constant communication. They've been raised on digital platforms that provide them with a voice. And so when they enter into institutions that are not allowing channels or haven't built the channels for those voices, it's disruptive and there's frustration. And my thinking in this moment is that we are actually in a massive multi-level change management process. We are redesigning, all of us are redesigning. I'm personally redesigning my career. City government is redesigning itself here in Philadelphia. Workplaces are redesigning themselves, and the way that we collaborate with one another and the way that we collaborate with the people that we serve, whether it's citizens, clients, or employees or customers, also needs to change. Of course, there's many in the private sector that have different names for equity infrastructure. It's, positive customer engagement channels, but we need to bring that across into other systems. As far as who does the work, in August 2019, the Business Roundtable made an announcement that was quite significant. Since the founding of the Business Roundtable in the 70s, we've seen corporate America focus on corporate America and serve primarily quarterly earnings and shareholders. And in August 2019, significant announcement from the table of 200 CEOs to say that we need to enter an age of stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism is really important. It's important for social cohesion. It's important to recognize that the world is in a different landscape and that we are facing massive challenges that, frankly, the public sector needs the help of the private sector. So I was very heartened to see that. And of course, there's some voices on the left that say that's a con and it's just for branding, but we can debate that in a different webinar. The fact of the matter is, in my belief, the best metro areas that will be ahead of the curve in this next fourth industrial revolution will be the ones that figure out how to collaborate among all stakeholders, not just CEOs, not just elite rooms, but rooms that have made room for all kinds of perspectives and voices, in a sense, crowdsourcing and building a new set of systems in a metro area in an open source and collaborative way, open source problem solving. Where would the work be done? Obviously, many folks on the panel have already talked about this. Of course, between and among sectors and silos, to pick up on the previous point about stakeholders, we have to break down the barriers, and sometimes it takes a translator. There needs to be those key leaders or consultants in a metro area that are able to translate from education jargon to corporate speak, to government speak, and really understand the what's in it for me, for all the stakeholders, so that you can function and problem solve as a geographic region. How is the work done? Again, government, corporations, transparency is key, authenticity is key. And it needs to be, in my view, in Philadelphia, we're organizing our FutureWorks Alliance according to 4 future-proofing pillars, so that the problems aren't overwhelming and that they are manageable and that they have defined strategies connecting them. You have to look at the talent of the future and build the talent pipelines that will prevent corporations from having talent wars. There's a significant shift in labor churn going on because of the age of automation and AI. The World Economic Forum estimates that 85 million jobs around the globe will be eliminated by automation and AI, but that 97 million other jobs will be created. Jobs, we don't know the names of those jobs yet. Nobody can adequately predict what those jobs will be. However, it's clear the consensus is in, there's a massive skills gap between those people who will lose those jobs and the folks that, and the skills that will be required by the jobs that will be created in the future. And so working together to bridge those gaps will prevent corporate America and regional headquarters and small businesses, medium-sized businesses, enterprises that want to grow in a specific geographic region. They are going to struggle with talent wars unless there is cooperation at the regional level to bolster and align your talent pipeline and your workforce development systems with the needs of the skills of the future and the competencies in technology and human problem-solving skills as well. And lastly, of course, the why. People and institutions are currently suffering from future shock. What is future shock? Future shock is a sense of disorientation and anxiety, even mental illness. You see it evident in declining social cohesion, distrust in institutions. These are very serious threats to democracy and capitalism, frankly. And so if we want to prevent, if we want to prevent humans from reducing, losing quality of life, and we want to prevent people from suffering future shock, we need to really bring together leaders and voices from all different sectors and silos, like we're doing in Philadelphia now, just recently launched FutureWorks Alliance, recognizing that this is a challenge and recognizing that no single CEO or governor or mayor can solve that problem on their own. And so we're building the equity infrastructure in Philadelphia that allows many voices to contribute to solutions, pilot things, engaging foundations, engaging our community college, for example, and our K-12 system. So I don't see a bigger why than that, saving democracy and preventing human misery. Those are pretty good reasons. So that's what gets me up in the morning. And that'll pretty much wrap it up. I know there's a great group of questions building up in the Q&A. So I'll turn it back to Ryan and we can transition to Q&A. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Brad, I think you've got another poll question to launch.
We do. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Ann. So this is kind of a follow-up on some of the work that, or some of the comments that Ann had on collaboration and where are you? So how likely are you to seek out new collaborative partnerships outside of your industry sector to help build for the future of work? So public, private, education, or government sector. So getting really good feedback in. So already doing so and very likely. So there are some significant changes coming out right now in the way that people are doing their work, the way that companies are doing their work. So give us a couple more seconds, and then we'll actually dive into some of the audience questions. We've got some really good questions to get to here. So give it just a couple of more seconds here, and then let me go ahead and end it and share the results. So almost half of the participants that answered are already seeking out new collaborative partnerships. And another third say they're very likely to do so. So I think that's a significant change. So let me go ahead and dive into this. So Q&A, let me go ahead and dive into a couple of the questions here that we had at the very beginning. And Raj, I'll ask this one to you first. This is from Drew. Do you believe in the idea that in-person work is more productive than remote work? And I'll add a kind of a secondary comment on that. Some of the questions are, how do you believe that leaders are looking at remote work? Is the mistrust of remote work going away, and that they actually do believe that productivity can be accomplished by their remote workforce?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I appreciate the folks calling that out. I think I'll start at the end and then work backwards. I think the mistrust of work from home still exists, to be quite honest. I think more and more folks are coming around to the idea that it can work. But a lot of the senior leaders I've seen at Wayfair, along with like my experiences in consulting, I've seen a lot of folks who like truly still believe that in-person is the way to go. Although the mistrust might still exist, I think reality still speaks for itself that like, hey, the gears of corporate entities have still been spinning. So even if you don't trust it, it's still working and still happening. So there's a level of like survive and adapt versus ignoring the facts. And also some winds of change there are like major players in the space who have adopted work from home as part of their mantra, their philosophy. So even if there's mistrust in your leadership or in certain organizations, they have to adapt because other folks who are major players like an Amazon, like a Google, have said like, hey, we can work from home indefinitely because we make it work. And so from someone like myself who works in the talent space, like our recruiters and our talent leaders, they say like, even if we don't want to work from home, we have to just to keep up with the competition. When it comes to productivity, again, like I work at a company that was built on the pillar of in-person collaboration, like being in the trenches together in a conference room or side by side. I think we're actually coming quite a bit around to the idea that like we haven't seen productivity drop. In many cases, we actually productivity accelerate because work from home can accommodate a lot more folks. Like you get the hour and a half or 2 hours back from your commute. For folks who have a lot of obligations or responsibilities at home, it's a lot more thoughtful there. For someone who just bought a new condo, I'm able to get packages delivered and furniture delivered at any time of the day now, which is pretty nice. So I think that we've actually been able to at least maintain productivity, if not become more productive. The key concern is actually folks who are getting more productive because they're just working more. So it's actually like productivity as an output versus productivity as like an average of your time spent. That's the more concern of, hey, if I'm just plugged in for 12 hours, yeah, productivity is not going to dip, but I'm also going to feel mentally unsafe. I'm going to feel burnt out. And that's actually where like the productivity as a ratio of time work becomes more of a topic that's top of mind.
Very good. Very good. Here's a question from Mike, and Ann, I'll position this to you. How do we best implement a working model that supports more junior colleagues? A brand new college grad may require more coaching and in-person interaction than an individual with 10 years experience. So talk a little bit about the skills gap, perhaps, and inclusion of junior colleagues.
Yeah, so this ties on a couple of levels to cities and also the proximity of anchor institutions, the talent pipeline of college graduates transitioning into the office. Those folks haven't built their professional networks yet. And I think that those folks are going to be the most likely to want and need to live close to a central area. And it's for this reason, for talent development internally at an entity, and also for just the liveliness of metro areas for younger folks, that the office won't entirely go away. This is a challenge for an employer to figure out like the best hybrid models and organize meetings. The devil's in the details for a lot of those things, but the implications for cities in terms of the tax base, in terms of the vibrancy and the pedestrian life for central areas is really reliant on youth and young professionals. So I guess I'm biased in that I want young professionals to be accommodated for that need, because it's a win-win for a lot of different sectors and universities as well to send interns over. And I think too, one of the things missing is like women are really suffering this pandemic. Professional women are getting squeezed and leaving the workplace. And I think that those are some of the folks that wanted work from home and flexible work situations the most. And in a kind of cruel irony, they got it, but at the same time, there's no schools and childcare situations are upended. So I think to preserve gender equity in middle management and C-suites, companies are gonna want to accommodate and figure out a hybrid model for women as well, not just young professionals.
Thank you, Ann. So last question here to Erica, and then we'll try to answer some of the questions. If people want to email them via LinkedIn, we'll try to get some responses out. But Erica, there's several questions about education here. So one is about access through technology to maybe underprivileged students, and asking about considering opening remote access through facilities like post offices, libraries, or other civil locations that have access to technology, or any other thoughts around making sure that there's an inclusive approach for remote education.
Yeah, so, I live in New Mexico, and we actually still have places in New Mexico that don't have access to high-speed internet at all in their communities. So I think, one, we need to solve that problem. We have the resources and the technologies to ensure that every citizen has access to broadband wireless. But what I would say is that there's actually a lot of schools that collaborated with both private and public sectors to provide free hotspots in parking lots, because remember, you can't have a lot of people going into a library or into a post office. So they would set up stations in various communities and neighborhoods where you could drive your car and actually access hotspots. So absolutely, I think, again, a kind of silver lining of COVID is that we've seen these creative ways that people are coming together to bring resources together to support people that don't have as many resources.
Erica, thank you very much. We have a ton of other really good questions. Thank you for sending them through. Thank you for joining us today. We'll try to get to them. Like I said, if you want to ask them in LinkedIn, just send me a message, and we will try to get the responses back to each of you. And as we are going to continue this program and this series, if anybody in your organization wants to apply to become an ambassador like our panelists today on the future of work, please go to futureworkpodcast.com/ambassador-program, and you'll see a link to apply. Join the community, share best practices. We love your feedback, love your participation. And again, on behalf of Experfy and the rest of my panelists, we thank you for taking time to join us today, and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, guys. It's a great program.
Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Brad, for having me.
You're most welcome. Thanks, everybody.